Welcome, workers and friends. Welcome back to Working Class Revolt. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist truck driver. I'm coming to you live from my humble home in rural North Carolina. Out here in is y'all say the States. It's a lovely winter evening, lovely Saturday winter evening. Big storm on the way. I'm all huddled up in here, and I got the heater on. I got this denim jacket on, and I'm ready to sit down with my wonderful co-host out there in the land down under, the thunder from down under, union organizer David Fox. How's it going, brother?
Very good, thank you. It's a very, very warm summer's day today. I mean, in Celsius, it's going to be 33 degrees Celsius. Um, and I think I don't know, I'm not too sure what that's in Fahrenheit, but it's going to be a particular hot day. I'm looking forward to a late afternoon swim, though, at a nearby lake.
Oh wow, that's great. That's crazy. Come together from halfway around the world, brother David Fox, and we are assembled here today for a very important cause. We are continuing our study of J.V. Stalin's The Foundations of Leninism. This is very, very important work, and we are plugging along, getting through it. Looks like we got 3 chapters left. We're well over halfway done. It's just the two of us tonight for a deep study on a longer chapter. So we'll get right into it. So we usually start by doing a little bit of background information. So this is chapter 7, strategy and tactics. And we were trying to ask a lot of our contacts, will you study the strategy and tactics chapter with us? And we got a lot of, no, I'm not too up to par on that subject. That is not my expertise. That's a little bit too much for me to handle. And it can be intimidating. I think Stalin breaks down, heavy theory and puts it in more working class language. Even though it was 100, this was written near 100 years ago. It's still very relevant, and it's still very relatable. We're still in the era of imperialism, and even though the conditions have intensified, further monopolization, those contradictions which they first discovered, Lenin, are only becoming more profound today. And this specific chapter of strategy and tactics really comes down to what scientific socialism is all about. Scientific socialism is not a religion. Scientific socialism is not a sect where the great hoaxa is the embodiment of the immortal science of Marxism, Leninism, the only true continuation of Marx and Lenin. That's not how it works.
That's right.
Scientific socialism is a tool. Scientific socialism is a tool to understand the world, to help the people engage, the mass of the people engage in politics, to push history forward and improve their conditions. And it's not, a lot of what you see on the internet, on the left book or what you have you in the Twitter books or the left Twitter, what have you, is people morally posturing. This is a lot of what anarchism is. Anarchism is the system is evil. Those people are evil. The war is evil. But I am the good anarchist. I don't consume meat products because of what it does to those poor innocent animals. Like coming from a class position of those who can afford to eat 3 times organic for better sourced vegetables and whatnot in the petty bourgeois moralistic class. This isn't what scientific socialism is. It is about us understanding the world, putting in the struggle, doing things that we might not want to do, to help our communities, to improve the conditions of the working class, to build power, and to navigate the reality that is our world. Hopefully, that's a good enough introduction. A little bit of talk on this, and nobody did that better than Stalin, who
Yeah.
was the leader of the Soviet Union, um, who understood what Lenin, how Lenin carried forth Marxism to better understand the era of imperialism, and led the first large scale socialist state, and then had great success by industrializing at unprecedented levels, the mechanization of agriculture, the vast improvement in the people's lives, the
Hmm.
inspiration around the world to the oppressed peoples. China stood up not too long after the Soviet Revolution. African Americans in the South, where I'm from, who were fleeing the horrible lynchings and racist conditions and horrible economic conditions of the Great Depression, went to visit the Soviet Union when it was expanding and there was more opportunities and excitement about the future. The exact
That's right.
opposite of what we see today and the core of a decaying empire.
Hmm.
I went on for a little bit there for the introduction.
That's-
Brother Fox, any
Well,
introductory remarks before we start reading the piece? Go ahead.
yeah, look, I read this some time back. Oh, many years back when I studied with a couple of comrades when I was living in Perth, and I think basically, or something I think, but it's basically what it's come down to. Theory and practice have to go together, and basically, when this was written out, it was also written out of the experiences of the Bolsheviks, but many others who are trying to take all sorts of deviations and that, and just to prove how incorrect it was, it had to be embedded in everyday concrete reality for working class people and poor people in general. And look, it argues against adventurism, and it argues against taking an ultra conservative line on things, left and right opportunism. It really is, and that's what I understand. Look, I've come across many people that are really good. They've read all in theory stuff, and they agree with it, and they're good at doing quotations, and they haven't put in the arguments. But when it actually gets into everyday concrete practice, they seem to fall. This is where they fall down. So this is the opportunity that the two have to go together. They're not separate. They're nothing's separate. Everything's connected, and that's why it's vitally important that theory and practice go together. So it's a vitally important chapter, and what we learn from that is how they went through it, and basically, yeah, and also too, I would just want to say it also avoids turning everything into a chat show. Look, I'm just being as guilty as charged with everyone else. We'll get together with some good like-minded people who want to do something, and it just winds up being an endless debating society. And that's what Marxism is, not a debating society. It's actually it's a guide, it's a toolbox or a guide to action, and and I think that's vitally was keep that in the back of your mind. So, yeah. And can you elaborate more on what you mean by exactly by practice? Well, it's obviously to see where people are at in your community, in your state, or in your country, be on particular issues. It could be anything. People are going to say, I'll give you an example. Some people said we should boycott elections. Well, has that got mass support? Is it practical to do so? And it's the discussion's got to be had, but it's got to be embedded in. But when you're carrying out that action, it's got to be in contra in league with where the masses are at. It's from the masses to the masses. So that's as Mal correctly pointed out. So that's what I meant by that. If I was hoping to incisive, I hope I elaborate that on a little bit as well. For Lewis. I cannot speak Spanish. I haven't got a bloody clue how to speak Spanish, so we do apologise. You might be able to actually click on your screen and go to subtitles. Might be able to change from English to Espiano. Mm.
All right. Thank you, brother, for that great introduction. I was just sharing this out. Um, I'm sharing this out to as many places as possible. So, everybody that's watching, make this a bigger conversation. Please like the video. Please subscribe. Please share this out on Twitter, Facebook group, chat groups, wherever you can post it. Looks like we have a a direct question here we can go ahead and answer before we get into discussion.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on what you mean exactly by practice? And as he contrasted theory from practice, theory is, basic principles that you have seen through history. That the different forces, how they interact with each other on a macro level. Practice is actually what you're going to do about it. Should I, pass out flyers here? Should I focus on this issue? Should I talk with these people? Should I talk with those people? Should I work in the labor movement? What have you? He says we just answered that. That's good. All right, and thanks. And we're really glad to have you here, Incisive. So we're going to get right into the reading. So here we are. J.V. Stalin, The Foundations of Leninism. Chapter 7, Strategy and Tactics. From this theme, I take 6 questions. A. Strategy and tactics as the science of leadership and the class struggle of the proletariat. B. Stages of the revolution and strategy. C. The ebb and flow of the movement and tactics. D. Strategic leadership. E. Tactical leadership. F. Reformism and revolutionism. 1. Strategy and tactics as the science of leadership in the class struggle of the proletariat. The period of the domination of the Second International was mainly a period of the formation and training of the proletarian political armies under conditions of more or less peaceful development. It was the period of parliamentarism and the predominant form of class struggle. Questions of class conflicts, of preparing the proletariat for revolutionary classes, of the means of achieving the dictatorship of the proletariat, did not seem to be on the order of the day at the time. The task was confined to utilizing all means of legal development for the purpose of forming and training the proletarian armies, to utilizing parliamentarism and conformity with the conditions under which the status of the proletariat remained, and, as it seemed, had to remain that of an opposition. It scarcely needs proof that in such a period, with such a conception of the tasks of the proletariat, there could be neither an integral strategy nor an elaborated tactics. There were fragmentary and detached ideas about tactics and strategy, but no tactics or strategy as such.
The mortal sin of the Second International was not that it pursued the tactics of utilising the parliamentary forms of struggle, but that it overestimated the importance of these forms, that it considered them virtually the only forms, and that when the period of open revolutionary battle set in and the question of extra parliamentary forms of struggle came to the fore, the parties of the Second International turned their backs on these new tasks, refused to shoulder them. Only the subsequent period, in the period of the direct action by the proletariat, in the period of proletarian revolution, when the question of overthrowing the bourgeoisie became a question of immediate action, when the question of the reserves of the proletariat strategy became one of the most burning questions, when all forms of struggle and of organisation, parliamentary and extra-parliamentary, that is, tactics, had fully manifested themselves and became well defined. Only in this period could an integral strategy and elaborate tactics for the struggle of the proletariat be drawn up. It was precisely in that period that Lenin brought out in the light of day the brilliant ideas of Marx and Engels on tactics and strategy that had been immured by the opportunists of the Second International. But Lenin did not confine himself to restoring certain tactical propositions of Marx and Engels. He developed them further and supplemented them with new ideas and propositions, combining them all into a system of rules and guiding principles for the leadership of the class struggle of the proletariat. Lenin's pamphlets such as What's to be Done, Two Tactics, Imperialism, and State and Revolution, the Proletarian Revolution, and the Renegade Kautsky, Left-Wing Communism, etc., will undoubtedly always be treasured as priceless contributions to the general store of Marxism, to its revolutionary arsenal. The strategy and tactics of Leninism constitute the science of leadership of the revolutionary struggle of the proletariat.
2. Stages of the revolution and strategy. Strategy is determination of the direction of the main blow of the proletariat at a given stage of the revolution, the elaboration of a corresponding plan for the disposition of the revolutionary forces, main and secondary reserves. The fight to carry out this plan throughout the given stage of the revolution. Our revolution had already passed through two stages, and after the October Revolution, it entered a third one. Our strategy changed accordingly. First stage, 1903 to February 1917. Objective, to overthrow Tsarism and completely wipe out the survivals of medievalism. The main force of the revolution, the proletariat. Immediate reserves, the peasantry. Direction of the main blow, the isolation of the liberal monarchist bourgeoisie, which was striving to win over the peasants and liquidate the revolution by a compromise with Tsarism. Plan for the disposition of forces, alliance of the working class with the peasantry. The proletariat must carry to completion the democratic revolution by allying to itself the mass of the peasantry in order to crush by force the resistance of the autocracy and to paralyze the instability of the bourgeoisie. Second stage, March 1917 to October 1917. Objective, to overthrow imperialism in Russia and to withdraw from the imperialist war. The main force of the revolution, the proletariat. Immediate reserves, the poor peasantry. The proletariat of neighboring countries as probable reserves. The protracted war and the crisis of imperialism as a favorable factor. Direction of the main blow. Isolation of the petty bourgeois Democrats, Mensheviks, and socialist revolutionaries who were striving to win over the toiling masses of the peasantry and to put an end to the revolution by compromise with imperialism. Plan for disposition of forces, alliance of the proletariat with the poor peasantry. The proletariat must accomplish the socialist revolution by allying to itself the mass of the semi-proletarian elements of the population in order to crush by force the resistance of the bourgeoisie and to paralyze the instability of the peasantry and the petty bourgeoisie.
Third stage, commenced after the October Revolution. Objective, to consolidate the dictatorship of the proletariat in one country, using it as a base for the overthrow of imperialism in all countries. The revolution is spreading beyond the confines of one country. The epoch of the world revolution has commenced. The main forces of the revolution, the dictatorship of the proletariat in one country, the revolutionary movement of the proletariat in all countries. Main reserves, the semi-proletarian and small peasant masses in the developed countries, the liberation movement in all the colonies and dependent countries. Direction of the main blow. Isolation of the petty bourgeois Democrats, isolation of the parties of the Second International, which constitute the main support of policy of compromise with imperialism. Plan of the disposition of forces, alliance of the proletarian revolution with the liberation movement in the colonies and dependent countries. Strategy deals with main forces of the revolution and their reserves. It changes with the passing of the revolution from one stage to another, but remains essentially unchanged throughout a given stage.
3. The flow and ebb of the movement and tactics. Tactics are the determination of the line of conduct of the proletariat in the comparatively short period of the flow or ebb of the movement, of the rise or decline of the revolution. To fight to carry out this line by means of replacing old forms of struggle and organization by new ones, old slogans by new ones, by combining these forms, etc., while the object of strategy is to win the war against Tsarism, let us say, or against the bourgeoisie, to carry through the struggle against Tsarism or against the bourgeoisie to its end. Tactics pursue less important objects, for their aim is not winning of the war as a whole, but the winning of some particular engagements or some particular battles, the carrying through successfully of some particular campaign or actions corresponding to the concrete circumstances in the given period of rise or decline of the revolution. Tactics are a part of strategy, subordinate to it and serving it.
Tactics change according to flow and ebb. While the strategic plan remained unchanged during the first stage of the revolution, 1903 to February 1917, tactics changed several times during that period. In the period of 1903 to 1905, the party pursued offensive tactics, for the tide of the revolution was rising, the movement was on the upgrade, and tactics had to proceed from this fact. Accordingly, the forms of struggle were revolutionary, corresponding to the requirements of the rising tide of the revolution. Local political strikes, political demonstrations, the general political strike, boycott of the Duma, uh, insurrection, revolutionary fighting slogans. Such were the successive forms of the struggle during that period. These changes in the forms of struggle were accompanied by corresponding changes in the forms of organisation. Factory committees, revolutionary peasant committees, strike committees, Soviets of workers' deputies, a workers' party operating more or less openly. Such were the forms of organisation during that period.
I'd like to take a short time out of the reading to
Cool.
acknowledge a very favorable guest, Sister Delia Gray. I was on her show recently. This is a sister out of Texas. Um, and I was on her show. I uploaded that video on the YouTube. So if you want to check out our conversation, you can go back and see it there. Let's take a moment to address her direct question. What is Tsarism? The Tsar was the feudal leader or monarch, the king, in more layman's terms, of the Russian Empire. And so this was during a socialist revolution, and history progresses in modes of production. First, you have feudalism with kings, and then capitalism, and eventually will evolve into socialism. So this was the first socialist, large-scale socialist revolution in a semi-feudal country. So, and they had to have the revolution in stages. So the first thing they did was the proletariat led the revolution, but allied with the bourgeoisie, well, elements of the bourgeoisie, but mostly the peasantry. And they had to cut off immediately the absolutely most reactionary forces, which were those of the feudal forces, the rule by God, one king who has dominion over everything. These are absolutely backwards and barbaric ideas that just and structures. We're talking about ideas which were brought about by actual material structures, and that had to be combated against, and done forward. That way, we could progress towards a more advanced society. I hope that answered your question, Sister Delia Gray, and we're very glad for you to join us. So I'll continue on with the reading. In the period from 1907 to 1912, the party was compelled to resort to tactics of retreat, for we then experienced a decline in the revolutionary movement. The ebb of the revolution, the tactics necessary, had to take this fact into consideration. The forms of struggle, as well as the forms of organization, changed accordingly. Let me hide that. Instead of the boycott of the Duma, participation in the Duma, instead of open revolutionary actions outside the Duma, actions and work in the Duma, instead of general political strikes, partial economic strikes, or simply a lull in activities. Of course, the party had to go underground during that period, while the revolutionary mass organizations were replaced by cultural, educational, cooperative, insurance, and other legal organizations.
Right. The same must be said of the second and third stages of the revolution, during which tactics changed dozens of times, whereas the strategical plans remained unchanged. Tactics deal with the forms of struggle and the forms of organisation of the proletariat, with their changes and combinations. During a given stage of the revolution, tactics may change several times, depending on the flow or ebb, the rise or decline of the revolution. 4. Strategic leadership. The reserves of the revolution can be direct. A. The peasantry and in general the intermediate strata of the population within the country. B. The proletariat of the neighbouring countries. C. The revolutionary movement in the colonies and dependent countries. D. The gains and achievements of the dictatorship of the proletariat, part of which the proletariat may give up temporarily, while retaining superiority of the forces in order to buy off a powerful enemy and gain a respite. And indirect. A. The contradictions and conflicts among the non-proletarian classes within the country, which can be utilised by the proletariat to weaken the enemy and to strengthen its own reserves. The contradictions, conflicts, and wars. The imperialist war, for instance, among the bourgeois states hostile to the proletarian state which can be utilised by the proletariat in its offensive or in manoeuvring in the event of a forced retreat.
There is no need to speak at length about the reserves of the first category, as their significance is clear to everyone. As for the reserve of the secondary category, whose significance is not clear, it must be said that sometimes they are of prime importance for progress of the revolution. One can hardly deny the enormous importance, for example, of the conflicts between the petty bourgeois Democrats, the socialist revolutionaries, the liberal monarchist bourgeoisie, the cadets, during and after the First Revolution, which undoubtedly played its part in freeing the peasantry from the influence of the bourgeoisie. Still less reason is there for denying the colossal importance of the fact that the principal groups of imperialists were engaged in a deadly war during the period of the October Revolution, when the imperialists engrossed in war among themselves and were unable to concentrate their forces against the young Soviet power. And the proletariat, for this very reason, was able to get down to the work of organizing its forces and consolidating its power. And to prepare the rout of the Kolchak and Denkin, it must be presumed that now, when the contradictions among the imperialist groups are becoming more and more profound, and when a new war among them is becoming inevitable, reserves of this description will assume even greater importance for the proletariat.
The task of the strategic leadership is to make proper use of all these reserves for the achievement of the main objective of the revolution at the given stage of its development. What does making proper use of reserves mean? It means fulfilling certain necessary contradictions, of which the following must be regarded as the principal ones. First, the concentration of the main forces of the revolution at the enemy's most vulnerable spot at the decisive moment, when the revolution has already become ripe, when the offensive is going full steam ahead, when insurrection is knocking at the door, and when bringing the reserves up to the vanguard is the decisive condition of success. The party's strategy during the period from April to October 1917 well illustrates this manner of utilising reserves. Undoubtedly, the enemy's most vulnerable spot at the time was the war. Undoubtedly, it was on this question, as the fundamental one, that the party rallied the broadest masses of the population around the proletarian vanguard. The party's strategy during this period was, while training the vanguard for street action by means of manifestations and demonstrations, to bring the reserves up to the vanguard through the medium of the Soviets in the rear and the soldiers' committees at the front. The outcome of the revolution was shown that the reserves were properly utilised.
Here is what Lenin, paraphrasing the well known thesis of Marx and Engels on insurrection, says about this condition of the strategic utilization of forces of the revolution. 1. Never play with insurrection, but when beginning it, firmly realize that you must go to the end. 2. Concentrate a great superiority of forces at this decisive point, at the decisive moment. Otherwise, the enemy, who has the advantage of better preparation and organization, will destroy the insurgents. 3. Once the insurrection has begun, you must act with greatest determination, by all means, without fail, to take the offensive. The defensive is the death of every armed uprising. 4. You must try to take the enemy by surprise and seize the moment when his forces are scattered. 5. You must strive for daily success, even if small, one might say hourly, if it is the case of one town, and at all costs retain the moral ascendancy.
Second, the selection of the moment for the decisive blow, of the moment for starting the insurrection, so timed as to coincide with the moment when the crisis has reached its climax, when it is fully apparent that the vanguard is prepared to fight to the end, the reserves are prepared to support the vanguard, and maximum consternation reigns in the ranks of the enemy. The decisive battle, says Lenin, may be deemed to have fully matured when, All the class forces hostile to us have become sufficiently entangled, are sufficiently at loggerheads with each other, have sufficiently weakened themselves in a struggle which is beyond their strength. When all of us vacillating, wavering, unstable, intermediate elements, the petty bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeois democrats, as distinct from the bourgeoisie, have sufficiently exposed themselves in the eyes of the people, has sufficiently disgraced themselves through their practical bankruptcies, when among the proletariat a mass sentiment in favour of supporting the most determined, supremely bold revolutionary action against the bourgeoisie has risen and begun vigorously to grow. Then revolution is indeed right. Then, indeed, if we have correctly gauged all the conditions indicated above, and if we have chosen the moment rightly, our victory is assured.
The manner in which the October uprising was carried out may be taken as a model of such strategy. Failure to observe the conditions led to a dangerous error called loss of tempo, when the party lags behind the movement or runs far ahead of it, corrupting the danger of failure. An example of such loss of tempo, of how the moment for an uprising should not be chosen, may be seen in an attempt made by a section of our comrades to begin the uprising by arresting the Democratic Conference in September 1917, when wavering was still apparent in the Soviets, when the armies at the front were still at the crossroads, when the reserves have not yet been brought up to the vanguard.
Third, undeviating pursuit of the course adopted, no matter what difficulties and complications are encountered on the road towards the goal. This is necessary in order that the vanguard may not lose sight of the main goal of the struggle, and that the masses may not stray from the road while marching towards that goal, and striving to rally around the vanguard. Failure to observe this condition leads to a grave error, well known to sailors as losing the course. As an example of this loss of course, we may mention the erroneous conduct of our party when, immediately after the Democratic Conference, it adopted a resolution to participate in the pre Parliament. For the moment, the party, as it were, forgot that the pre Parliament was an attempt of the bourgeoisie to switch the country from the path of the Soviets to the path of bourgeois parliamentarianism, that the party's participation in such a body might result in mixing up all the cards and confusing the workers and peasants, who were waging a revolutionary struggle under the slogan, All Power to the Soviets. This mistake was rectified by the withdrawal of the Bolsheviks from the pre Parliament.
Fourthly, maneuvering the reserves with a view to effecting a proper retreat when the enemy is strong, when retreat is inevitable, when to accept battle forced upon us by the enemy is obviously disadvantageous, when with the given relation of forces, retreat becomes the only way to escape a blow against the vanguard and to retain the reserves for the latter.
The revolutionary parties, says Lenin, must complete the education. They have learned to attack. Now they have to realize that this knowledge must be supplemented with the knowledge of how to retreat, and properly. They have to realize that the revolutionary class is taught to realize it is by its own bitter experience that victory is impossible unless they have learned both how to attack and how to retreat. Sorry, how to attack and how to retreat properly. The object of this tragedy is to gain time, to demoralize the enemy, and to accumulate forces in order later to assume the offensive.
The signing of the Brest Peace may be taken as a model of this strategy, for it enabled the party to gain time, to take advantage of conflicts in the camp of the imperialists, to disrupt the forces of the enemy, to retain the support of the peasantry, and to accumulate forces in preparation for an offensive against Kloklock and Denken.
Oh, okay. In concluding a separate piece, said Lenin at the time, we free ourselves as much as possible at the present moment when both hostile imperialist groups we take advantage of their mutual enmity and warfare, which hamper concerted action on their part against us, and for the certain period have our hands free to advance and to consolidate the socialist revolution. Now, even the biggest fool, said Lenin, 3 years after the Litov peace, can see that the Brest peace was a concession that strengthened us and broke up the forces of international imperialism.
Such are the principal contradictions with which ensure correct strategic leadership. 5. Tactical leadership. Tactical leadership is part of strategic leadership, the subordinated to the tasks and the requirements of the latter. The task of tactical leadership is to master all forms of struggle and organization of the proletariat and to ensure that they're used properly so as to achieve, with the given relations of forces, the maximum results necessary to prepare for strategic success.
What is meant by making proper use of the forms of struggle and organisation of the proletariat? It means fulfilling certain necessary conditions, of which the following must be regarded as the principal ones. First, put in the forefront precisely those forms of struggle and organisation which are best suited to the conditions prevailing during the flow or ebb of the movement at a given moment, and which therefore can facilitate and ensure the bringing of the masses to the revolutionary positions, the bringing of the millions to the revolutionary front, and a disposition at the revolutionary front.
The point here is not that the vanguard should realize the impossibility of preserving the old regime and the inevitability of its overthrow. The point is that the masses, the millions, should understand this inevitability and display their readiness to support the vanguard. But the masses can understand this only from their own experience. The task is to enable to vast masses to realize from their own experience the inevitability of the overthrow of the old regime, to promote such methods of struggle and forms of organizations as will make it easier for the masses to realize from experience the correctness of revolutionary slogans.
The vanguard would have become detached from the working class, and the working class would have lost contact with the masses if the party had not decided at the time to participate in the Duma. If it had not decided to concentrate its forces on work in the Duma and to base the struggle on this work in order to make it easier for the masses to realise from their own experience the futility of the Duma, the falsity of the promises of the constitutional democrats, the impossibility of compromise with Tsarism, and the inevitability of an alliance between the peasantry and the working class. Had the masses not gained their experience during the period of Duma, the exposure to the constitutional democrats and the hegemony of the proletariat would have been impossible.
The danger of the Azovist tactics was that they threatened to detach the vanguard for the millions of its reserves. The party would have become detached from the working class, and the working class would have lost its influence along the broad masses of the peasants and soldiers. If the proletariat had followed the left communists, who called for an uprising in April 1917, when the Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries had not yet exposed themselves as advocates of war and imperialism, when the masses had not yet realized from their own experience the falsity of speeches of the Mensheviks and the socialist revolutionaries about peace, land, and freedom, had the masses not gained the experience during the Kerensky period, the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries would not have been isolated, and the dictatorship of the proletariat would have been impossible. Therefore, the tactics of patiently explaining the principles of the petty bourgeois parties and of open struggle in the Soviets were the only correct tactics. The danger of the tactics of the left communists was that they threatened to transfer the party from the leadership of the proletarian revolution into a handful of futile conspirators with no ground to stand on.
Victory cannot be won with the vanguard alone, says Lenin. To throw the vanguard alone into the decisive battle before the whole class, before the broad masses have taken up a position either or direct support of the vanguard, or at least of benevolent neutrality towards it, would not merely follow, would not be merely be a folly but a crime. In order that actually the whole class, that actually the broad masses of toilers and those oppressed by capital may take up such position, propaganda and agitation alone are not enough. For this, the masses must have their own political experiences. Such is the fundamental law of all great revolutions, now confirmed with astonishing force and vividness, not only in Russia but also in Germany, but only in the uncultured, often illiterate masses of Russia, but the highly cultured, entirely literate masses of Germany, and to realise through their own painful experiences the absolute impotence and spinelessness, the absolute helplessness and servility to the bourgeoisie, the utter vileness of the government of the Knights of the Second International, the absolute inevitability of a dictatorship of the extreme reactionaries. That's Kornilov in Russia.
Okay.
Hang on, sorry. I'll still continue. As the only alternative to the dictatorship, the prolet, in order to turn them resolutely towards communism.
Secondly, to locate at any given moment the particular link in the chain of processes which, if grasped, will enable us to keep hold of the whole chain and prepare the conditions for achieving strategic success. The point here is to single out from all tasks confronting the party the particular immediate task, the fulfillment of which constitutes the central point, and the accomplishment of which ensures the successful fulfillment of other immediate tasks. The importance of this thesis may be illustrated by two examples, one of which could be taken from the remote past, the period of the formation of the party, and other from the immediate present, the period of the NEP.
In the period of the formation of the party, when the innumerable circles and organisations had not yet been linked together, when amateurishness and the parochial outlook of the circles were creating the party from top to bottom, then when ideological confusion was a characteristic feature in the internal life of the party, the main link and the main task in the chain of links and in the chain of tasks then confronting the party proved to be the establishment of an all Russian legal newspaper. Why? Because only by means of an all Russian legal newspaper was it possible, under the conditions then prevailing, to create a solid nucleus of a party, one capable of linking up the innumerable circles and organisations into a single organisation, to prepare the conditions for ideological and tactical unity, and thus to lay the foundations for the formation of a real party.
During the period of transition from war to economic construction, when industry was vegetating in the grip of distribution and agriculture was suffering from a shortage of ermine manufactured goods, when the establishment of bond between state industry and peasant economy became the fundamental contradiction for success social construction, in the period it turned out that the main link in the chain of processes, the main task among a number of tasks, was to develop trade. Why? Because under the conditions of the NEP, the bond between industrial and peasant economies cannot be established except through trade. Because under the conditions of the NEP, production without sale is fatal for industry. Because industry can be expanded only by the expansion of sales as a result of developing trade. Because only after we consolidate our position in the sphere of trade, only after we have secured the control of trade, only after we have secured the link, can be any hope of linking industry with the peasant market and successfully fulfilling the other immediate tasks in order to create the conditions for building the foundations of socialist economy.
It is not enough to be a revolutionary and an adherent of socialism or a communist in general, says Lenin. One must be able to each particular moment to find the particular link in the chain which one must grasp with all one's might in order to hold the whole chain and to prepare firmly for the transition of the next link. At the present time, this link is the revival of internal trade under proper state regulation, direction. Trade, that is the link in the historical chain of events in the transitional forms of our socialist construction in 1921 to 22, which we must grasp with all our might. These are the principal conditions which ensure correct tactical leadership. 6. Reformism and revolutionism. What is what is the difference between revolutionary tactics and reformist tactics? Some think that Leninism is opposed to reforms, opposed to compromises and to agreements in general. This is absolutely wrong. Most Bolsheviks know as well as anybody else that in a certain sense every little helps. That under certain conditions, reforms in general and compromises and agreements in particular are necessary and useful.
To carry on a war for the overthrow of the international bourgeoisie, says Lenin, a war which is 100 times more difficult, protracted, and complicated than most stubborn of ordinary wars between states, and to refuse beforehanded to maneuver to utilize the conflict of interest, even though temporary, among one's enemies, to reject agreements and compromises when with possible, even though temporary, unstable, vacillating, conditional allies. In not this ridiculous in the extreme? Is it not as though, when making a difficult ascent of an unexplored and hitherto inaccessible mountain, we were to refuse beforehand ever to move in zigzags or to retrace our steps, even to abandon the course once selected and try others? Obviously, therefore, it is not a matter of reforms or of compromise and agreements, but of the use people make of reforms and agreements.
Sorry, I just lost my tack there for a sec.
To a
Agreements.
reformist, reforms are everything, while revolutionary work is something incidental, something just to talk about, mere eyewash. That is why, with reformist tactics, under the conditions of the bourgeois rule, reforms are inevitability transformed into an instrument for strengthening that rule, an instrument for disintegrating the revolution.
No, right, okay, okay. It was mine's a little bit different here. Sorry, I apologise about that. I'll just continue on from this one. This is the position in regards to reforms and agreements uh, under imperialism. The situation changes somewhat. However, after the overthrow of imperialism
What?
under the
I'm a little
dictatorship,
hold.
yeah,
My continuation is to a revolutionary. On the contrary, the main thing is revolutionary work.
oh, okay.
Okay.
Sorry, the audience and yourself, because I've got an older book. They must have changed, yeah, something. Okay, I'll start from there. I do apologise. Yeah, to a revolutionary, on the contrary, the main thing is revolutionary work and not reforms. To him, reforms are byproducts of the revolution. That is why the revolutionary tactics under the bourgeois regime reforms are naturally transformed into instruments for disintegrating this regime into instruments for strengthening the revolution into a base for the further development of the revolutionary movement. The revolutionary will accept a reform in order to use it as an aid in combining legal work with illegal work to intensify under its cover the illegal work of the revolutionary preparation of the masses for the overthrow of the bourgeoisie. This is what making revolutionary use of reforms and agreements under the conditions of imperialism means. The reformists, on the contrary, will accept reforms in order to renounce all illegal work, to thwart the preparation of the masses for the revolution, and to rest in the shade of bestowed reforms. This is what reformist tactics means. This is the position in regard to reforms and agreements under imperialism. Now,
The situation changed somewhat, however, after the overthrow of imperialism. Under the dictatorship of the proletariat, under certain conditions and a certain situation, the proletarian power may find itself compelled temporarily to leave the path of the revolutionary construction of the existing order of things and to take the path of its gradual transformation. The reformist path, as Lenin says, is his well known article, The Importance of Gold. The path of flanking movements, of reforms in consciousness to the non proletarian classes, in order to disintegrate these classes, to give the revolution to respite, to recuperate one's forces and prepare the conditions for a new offensive. It cannot be denied that, in a sense, this is a reformist path, but it must be borne in mind that there is a fundamental distinction here, which consists in the fact that in this case, the reform emanates from the proletarian power. It strengthens the proletarian power. It procures for its necessary respite. Its purpose is to disintegrate not the revolution, but the non proletarian classes.
under such conditions, to reform is thus transformed into its opposite. The proletarian power is able to adopt such a policy only because the sweep of the revolution in the preceding period was broad enough and therefore provided a sufficiently wide expanse within which to retreat, substituting for offensive tactics the tactics of temporary retreat, the tactics of flanking movements. Thus, while formerly under the bourgeois regime, reforms were a byproduct of revolution, Now, under the dictatorship of the proletariat, the source of reforms is the revolutionary gains of the proletariat, the reserves accumulated in the hands of the proletariat and consisting of these gains.
Only Marxism, says Lenin, has precisely and correctly defined the relation of reforms to revolution. However, Marx was able to see this relation only from one aspect, namely, under the conditions preceding the first to any extent permanent and lasting victory of the proletariat, if only in a single country. Under those conditions, the basis of the proper relations was reforms are a byproduct of the revolutionary class struggle of the proletariat. After the victory of the proletariat, if only in a single country, something new enters into the relation between reforms and revolutions. In principle, it is the same as before, but a change in the form takes place, which Marx himself could not foresee, but which can be appreciated only on the basis of philosophy and politics of Marxism. After the victory, while still remains a byproduct of an international scale, they, i.e., reforms, are, in addition, for the country in which victory has been achieved, a necessary and legitimate respite in those cases when, after the utmost exter-
Exertion.
extension of effort, it becomes obvious that sufficient strength is lacking for the revolutionary accomplishment of this or that transition. Victory creates such a reserve of strength that it is possible to hold out even in a forced retreat, to hold out both material and morally.
Wow.
That concludes the chapter 7 of Stalin's Foundations of Leninism, Strategy and Tactics. Initial responses. That was beautiful. I love Stalin. I love reading Stalin. There's nothing I'd rather do than sit here and look at and just read somebody who just gathered all these masses of people, the peasantry, led by the workers, in coalition with the bourgeoisie, first to destroy Tsarism and then to destroy capitalism, which is imperialism itself, and construct the first large-scale socialist revolution, and then to continue those tactics and understand how those tactics change from the revolutionary period to the period of construction, and what Stalin was able to do in uniting the masses of peasants with the proletariat, building through these controlled markets, to save the lives of people, to stop famines, to industrialize agriculture, is absolutely beautiful, and it was an inspiration to the world. That I'm just blown away. My initial response to reading the material is just wow. That is beautiful. Brother Fox, initial response.
Well, I mean, that is, as I said, it's quite an extensive read, but as I said, it was straightforward type read, and this was out of their own practical everyday experiences leading right up to October 1917, even after. And so they touched on some of that as well, and it's really good how they clearly spelled it out. What we have to do is either advance when we're in retreat, how we have to adopt to our material conditions. We've got no choice. So we can't sort of like live in a dream world and come up with and try to do something that's out of the ordinary. We've got to look at where concrete reality is and how we're going to operate moving forward. And I think it's certainly it's something. This is what we learn from. You don't have to actually identically do what the Bolsheviks did, right? Because they're a particular historical epoch in their history and under particular historical general conditions. So all of us here in the US or Australia, but anywhere else, we're looking to look at where everything's at and then how we go about moving things. And once again, this is not a dogma. It's not it's just something, there's no actual dead set blueprint how we go about it. Well, obviously, this is a guide to action, and this just comes to show some practical experiences where we learn from these guys, because the fact is, at the end of the day, they did it. They did it, and they learned from it, and they also learned from their mistakes as well. And look, I think out of that, it's sort of, I've made mistakes, no doubt, and it's good reassuring. We'll make mistakes, but we're going to need to have a look at it, need to learn from it, and how we can do things differently. So, yeah, I'm actually blown away by the whole thing. I love Stalin's work. It's straightforward. It's for the ordinary day working class people to understand.
There was a question that I saw in here. Okay. Here's a good one. What is the best use of our time? I guess education, increasing our numbers. I don't. I saw it earlier. Like, what? How do we apply this to science today? Was essentially the question that I was looking for, that I can't find, but I can definitely easily apply it. So in Stalin's time, in the Bolshevik Revolution, the time period before that was the Second International, which was because of the relatively advancing capitalist system. The workers were able to increase their conditions by the legal means through reformism and through unions. And because they were able to increase their means, at least in Western Europe and Russia, uh, was because why am I going to go out and kill and die in a revolution to get my needs met when I'm getting a meat through the regular legal facilities? And if somebody was to go in that time period and be like, hey, you need to stop being reformist, how are they going to convince the workers who are improving their conditions? They're not going to. So in Russia, where they had the intensified contradictions at the peripheral of Western imperialism, if you read in the beginning, where they had the most intense contradictions of feudalism and imperialism and oppression of workers simultaneously. They were able to, with the crisis of the imperialist war, on the slogan of peace, land, and bread, and through the party of a new type, they were able to first make the alliance with the peasants and the bourgeoisie to kick out Tsardom. And then eventually they were able to detach the reformist elements, not through going out and like telling them, but through them being exposed only after they continued the imperialist war. After they were able to use peace, land, and bread to say, hey, these bourgeois people ain't in your interest, and then the masses were able then to actually have a socialist proletarian revolution. So let's look at that in our time today in the United States. I would say we're dealing with the legacy of the new left. The new left is a detached from the working class, petty bourgeoisie, hooked to academia, hooked to the Democrat, fake left that has been twisted and manipulated by the CIA to look into deconstruction of society instead of actually building working class power. That is what we're living in the legacy of today. That is why the Communist Party USA is hopelessly hooked to the Democrats, because they don't have a working class base. This is why other parties are hooked into the protest cage, and they can't get out and address the masses because they're not working class movements. If we look back at the so-called dinosaur left, the old communist movement, it's kind of what we need to go back into. It's they basically destroyed it through McCarthyism, through building the labor aristocracy. Especially in the United States, we don't even have socialist communist parties. If you say socialism or communism just as recently as 10 years ago, you'd be laughed out of the room and demonized. So what's happening now? Now that the labor aristocracy is dwindling, conditions are worsening. People are looking for, more alternatives. We need a resurgence of working class socialism, Marxist-Leninism, that comes from the working class community. We need to make Marxism working class again. That's how I feel. how things are transitioning in our time period, applying what Stalin did in his time period, the logic and reasoning to the current circumstance. Comrade Fox, what do you think of that analysis? Anything to add on to it?
Yeah, look, I think that's a fantastic analysis because we look at today, and I mean, for us both here in the US and Australia, I think one thing we can do, yeah, and I know I believe one of the comrades here about education, very vitally important. I won't argue against that. I think it's exceptionally important about education. Education must be linked to everyday concrete demands and the current struggle. Okay, it can't be divorced from that. So yes, again, education is once increasing the numbers will come with that, but also to this where the theory comes into the practice. Now, the Centre of Political Innovation (CPI) I think it's got a 4 or 5 point plan. They're actually putting it out to the masses, and it's a really good one too. And we're adopting it here for Australia for our group. And obviously, one of the big demands is a government of action that fights for working families. And correct me if I'm wrong. There's other one about health, about fusion energy, and there was something else. High speed, is it high speed rail? Something. I can't just think of it off the top of my head. I haven't got it in front of me. To apologise, but these are something that's actually ingrained in every concrete reality of ordinary working people. This should be the US, but with something we're looking at adopting here, we may add a few extra or whatever. That's certainly pertaining to Australian conditions. But these are something because even when I've actually gone out and talked to workers in my capacity as an organiser, and even just ordinary people in general, have said, no, we need a government of action that fights for working families. Just for that one alone, that resonates with everyone. They just say, well, hell yeah. Yeah, we definitely do. And that really works, and it resonates with them. It's not trendy. We're not trying to go and change it to this trendy pseudo inner city academic whatever hot crap. It needs to be, it needs to be there for garnering everyday ordinary people, and it does resonate with them. And said, yes, certainly do, especially under this certain climates we're on. We've got COVID running rampant. It's a complete schmozzle here in Australia, no doubt in the US as well. Everyone's left to fend for themselves now. People are divided in that. But once we start putting a few concrete demands like that in place, we can actually go to political parties. We don't have to run around candidates ourselves, but even go to all the political candidates and political parties and says, well, what's your position on this? And see what they say. Uh, and then start actually, and it's a good way to get them to expose themselves as well for what they really are, especially the major parties. It's a good way to educate the masses. Well, here they are, they're exposing it. They're not interested in fighting for you. They're not interested in this. They're not interested in that. In fact, this is what they're interested in doing is maintaining and ruling capital over you and make sure profit reigns supreme. And this is what the system we're under. We're under a system where profits reign supreme. Profits are in command. So yeah, I think it's that's a start. I mean, to shoot off hunt, we have a revolution tomorrow. Look, that's not scientific. We will, it's certain part we will, and it depends on how course of history builds up. Things are going to come and flow and ebb. Things will sometimes have to withdraw a bit. And times we have to advance. It's going to depend, but it's also to a learning curve because it's interesting. And this is my swipe at a lot of left groups out there that they're going on saying about China and all the rest of them saying, oh, it's not real socialism, this and that. Well, so have they ever led a revolution? Have they ever led a revolution? No. That's as simple as that. Pronto, no, they do not know how to do it either. They're in a very incorrect position. And I love it how they go, oh, we're the party of the proletariat. Well, no, they're not. Wrong. As well. They've got no mass base at all. So sorry, I'm just having a little swap there, but I get very angry at them at times when they often do these adventurous things without consulting with anyone. They think they're the ants pants of the world and all that. But it's good to all right, But at the end of the day, you go and do that, and then just see what happens. And so that's vitally important. But going back to the CPI, I think using that as Dust, Caleb, and many other people have set this up. It's a really good way of moving forward. It's a really good way to put that out to people and even preach the word socialism as well. Well, not the word, but to really talk socialism with every ordinary day people. So it's a starting point, and that's where we will work from there. I'll just actually go on for a little bit further. There was a comment by James about the Upper Clyde shipyard occupation of the 1970, 1971, I'm led to believe. I actually read the little book about, and Jimmy Reed was the main leader. He was a member of the Communist Party of Britain, or Communist Party of Great Britain, it was then known at the time. I'm not too sure he was occupation, but he worked there. The Upper Clyde shipyards were in Glasgow, Scotland, It was a major shipbuilding place. They were on the verge of closure and that, but they kept the shipyards open. The workers organised under, and this is where good communist work organisation works. They had a good shop committee of shop stewards. They went out there, they organised the workers and organised a long-term campaign. They occupied the shipyards, not for just where work didn't cease. They continued to work themselves. They built the ships, etc. And actually, really, what we should learn from that lesson. The book I will actually read, it's actually with a Labour History Society now. I'm not too sure it's still in print, or if you can actually get it. Probably rare as anything now, but I think it's vitally important we learn from those things, because occupations like that are vitally important to learn from as well. Both union capacity, but developed from not just a wages and conditions struggle, but to a struggle to take over production and get control. Sorry, my camera and I dubbed that, and I think that's vitally important. Production is important to take over as well. So it's a good lesson learned. They're not going to preach that everyone will teach that anywhere, for very obvious reasons. They don't want to know that workers are quite capable of taking over. And that's actually another good one we can put out to ordinary working people out there. So you guys, everyone we all run the system. We already, or not, we don't own it, but we run everything. We're quite capable of running it without capitalists at all. When you think about it, we're quite good. We make things, we drive things, we repair things, we service everything. Whoops, there goes my camera because it's decided to be insolent. I'm just going to adjust the Excel. Excuse me, I do apologise for that, but something fell off.
It's all right, brother.
There. So I'll just continue on. But I mean, we do directly everything, and it's quite interesting. I've been in situations where all of a sudden something's gone on, but we don't have any supervisor or leading hand, for example. So someone on night starts organising, and we actually are quite more productive once we actually work out how things move forward. We're actually a lot more productive. Interesting stuff than under a capitalist one. So it just shows you, that's just a very basic form. Well, you can see socialism in place, but what socialism is it where all the major industries and that are organised around a plan, and working classes in power. You'd be surprised it's a lot more advanced system than, say, when we're under capitalism, where profits are in command and where the capitalists are in power. So it just shows the superiority. We can do it. It can be done. And that Upper Clyde shipyard occupation of the early 1970s in Scotland, the United Kingdom, led by Jimmy Reid and Communist Party of Great Britain, is an important point in history. Very good one to learn. And look, thanks, James, for bringing that to our attention. We greatly appreciate that.
Right on, brother. So I discussed that was a very great labor example. I love those examples, that come to this theory and strategy and put it into some hardcore tactics. And I think that is a lot of what we need to do. We need to use these immediate struggles. The labor struggle right now. Workers are facing inflation, and they're angry, and they're facing huge cutbacks. And the union leadership, just to maintain its own justification for its own existence, has to do something for the workers. And getting involved in those struggles, those immediate struggles, are great schools for the revolution. That's a way to build the masses. That is a way to build workers' power. But you can't lose sight of the overall vision and then get too entrenched within the tactic of labor organizing, or within the different parties, or even community work itself. You can't get so indensed into that and so attached to that tactic that you lose the overall strategy of eventually, taking over and having a socialist revolution. Maybe not a violent one. We're not pushing for violence, especially given the current conditions where the people aren't up to that, or aren't ready for that yet. We're not adventurous, but we have to have that, at least some kind of a sea change, some kind of a shift, some kind of a breaking point in mind. We need to be working towards that. So I talked about how it's very similar. The so-called New Left, the tactics they used and organizing on the campus in petty bourgeois circles, that worked was necessary during the height of the labor aristocracy, when the masses weren't ready to hear a socialist message. Now that's changing, and now people are, we're facing this inflation, we're facing this COVID. We've gone through three different uh, recessions in my lifetime. Our buying power is wholly diminished. Now we got people looking for answers. But who are we organizing, and what are we organizing against? Stalin called it who led it, who are the reserves, and who is the main blow against in our current time period. And I would say the main force are the people who is the internet, and at least in the United States, is the lower strata or lower section of the international proletariat. I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about people who aren't in the managerial class, nurses, CNAs, not academics, not even teacher. I'm talking about the field workers. I'm talking about the chicken plant workers. I'm talking about the production workers. I'm talking about the hospitality industry, the construction workers, the main center of the productive forces in the proletariat, which is international and has a large section of oppressed nations within it. I would say that is the main strive. Those are the people who are being discontented. Those are the people who are desperate and looking for answers. And they're not hooked to that old left. They're not hooked to the reformist movement. They're actually more open to revolutionary ideas than the so-called new left that's hooked to the protest cage and hooked to academia. And who are the reserves? I would say the reserves are the small business owners. The reserves are the managers. The reserves are the middle capitalists. The reserves are the oppressed nations, if the oppressed nations aren't leading it themselves. I know internationally they're leading it, but we're so just coming up on this period of tension. Things are changing so quickly that what we're doing right now is we're focusing on these immediate struggles. We're educating, and we're analyzing the collapse of imperialism as it unfolds around us. Um, so, and what is the main blow? And this is the very important thing that people lose sight of. The protest cage communist parties, the academic left, they don't understand the main blow. They don't understand the main blow because they are aligned with the stronger section of the monopoly capitalists, which is the Democratic Party. They are the stronger, more effective portion of the imperialist duopoly. So, and they're hopelessly hooked to them. It's ridiculous. Who is the main blow? The main blow needs to be against the monopoly capitalist imperialists. That's who it got to be. And if you lose sight of the tactic, and you start to organize within the sheepdog camp, you start organizing as a tactic within the union camp, and then you get hooked in, and you start repeating their propaganda. And a good example of this is the COVID issue. Now, the main portion, the stronger, more effective portion of the imperialist duopoly, the Democrats, has been trying to blame workers for the COVID crisis. What they have hyper focus on masks and vaccines, which are an important part of the strategy. But what do they leave out? They leave out how the imperialist duopoly has been negating and destroying and shutting down the medical infrastructure for decades. Go ahead. For decades, they've been shutting down the medical infrastructure. And also, why don't we have universal health care? Why don't they raise that? And that is a popular demand that the working class itself can make. You don't go to a worker and say, shut up, you need to wear a mask. You're killing people because you're not getting the vaccine. You're not getting a mask. You're like, you are a worker. You are exploited. You are oppressed. You go to the small business person. You're like, the monopolies are putting you out of business. Align with the working class. Align with the workers. Demand universal health care. Demand rebuilding of our medical infrastructure. Do things that actually save lives. Mobilize along the material contradictions of class.
That's right.
The middle capitalist against the monopoly capitalist, the workers against the capitalist system in general, the oppressed nations against the systemic racism and the systemic infrastructure of national oppression, and form as big a coalition as possible amongst the working class, oppressed nations, and even middle capitalists against the monopoly capitalists, and unite with those who are actually leading the global revolution, which is the anti-imperialist and socialist bloc being led by China and Russia and Syria and the rising pink tide in Latin America, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and so forth. And this is how we got to get. And what people are doing is they're getting lost in the tactic and losing the overall strategy. It's okay to compromise in a tactic. Go back some, move forward some. But if you lose the overall viewpoint of who the enemy is, then you then become manipulated and you become a pawn of the enemy. If you join the sheepdog imperialist camp and put all your eggs in the basket of mobilizing for Bernie Sanders, all you do is echo bourgeois propaganda that blames workers, that alienates the rural from the urban proletariat, and you just strengthen the enemy, the imperialist. We need to build working class power, mobilize the masses, and put it into conflict with the main enemy, which is the monopoly capitalist imperialists.
Exactly, exactly. And like further on that, I mean that was a great outline we can do now. I mean we've got to bring everyone together. I mean COVID has they basically the imperialists have used COVID to divide the working class over being pro-vax or anti-vax. That's not the issue. Right, that is not the issue. The issue is a class struggle in medicine. Yes, and actually, I highly recommend because if you actually want to do a study on the pharmaceutical mafia, there's a section out of this book by Harper Bra, Imperialism, the Eve of Socialist Revolution of the Proletariat. It's actually called The Pharmaceutical Mafia. It's a very good one to read. It was written in the early 2000s. But that's beside the point. It wasn't just about pharmaceuticals. This is over imperialism, capitalism. And we need to have everyone united again because, unfortunately, what we call the academic, the synthetic left, whatever, all these other groups and stuff, they're not actually uniting the working class around the common enemy. And this is the tragic here. What we're seeing in Australia. Then you've got other groups moving in, creating national chauvinism and other things, and they're not actually providing anything in the way forward. They're just harnessing people's anger and fear to make something even uglier. Moving on, and this is where we're going to need to actually get back in and get out from the movement and get into the masses. As a matter of urgency, and that CPI plan is fantastic to use that as just as a model, as many other things, other tactics and information you might want to use in your own respective conditions. But this is why it needs to be done. And because if we're otherwise, we're just going to be continuing going around and around and around and around in circles and achieving nothing, which is basically the old form. What's the old form of insanity? It's consistently doing the same thing over and over and over, trying to achieve a different result. And it's and we should all learn that by now. We're not getting anywhere, but we need to get everyone back into it. And if you want to talk about COVID, is there a class struggle in medicine? Certainly is. Certainly is, and we need to have a working class line put forward to it as well. More healthcare, more hospitals built, etc. And Dus has already said that, so that there you go. You've got something to work around.
Mm. Very powerful, very powerful. We got about, I don't want to go more than an hour and a half or about hour and 17 minutes into this. I got what I needed to say out there. Maybe we'll go over some of these these questions.
Also,
Go ahead, brother.
just a couple of things. I know it was for people like Delia or Delia. Correct. I apologise if I have your name pronounced your name wrong. Look, some of the wording that you're learning, like the Tsar or Tsarism, that means the emperor. of Russia. That's the term for emperor. But even too, people might have heard dictatorship of the proletariat. Don't be fearful of that. Keep that in context of when that was written, how it was written. When Karl Marx wrote that originally in the 1800s, he wrote it in about 2 or 3 languages combined. So when it was translated in English, that's how it came out. In fact, what it means is rule of the working class, working class rule. That's instead of capitalist class rule, which we're living under, it's working class rule, and that's what he actually meant by that. So don't be too alarmed when some people get a little bit alarmed when they see dictator. I just think, what? No, no. Just keep that in an historical context, and that's how it was written out. So
yeah, I want to bring up this comment.
that was so whoever translated in the time, we can incisive. So they got a concession.
Yeah, I want to bring up this comment from Incisive. So they got a concession. Don't get me wrong. I applied them, but it's not a revolution. We had the same thing in the U.S. in the 30s, where significant concessions were made. But look at us now today. Now that's interesting. This idea of concessions, the labor aristocracy, and the overall goal of the revolution. Now, if we go back into the 1930s and 40s, we're looking in the United States. We're looking at the height of the Communist Party. The Soviet Union is in power. The Communist Party is mass. It is hundreds of thousands of members who are linked to who are leading unions, who are leading community organizations, who are leading civil rights organizations that have millions of people that are being influenced and mobilized by the Communist Party. And because of that, in the crisis within the Great Depression and in the post-World War order, when the U.S. became undisputably the dominant imperialist power, they were able to give concessions to a large portion of the working class, creating the labor aristocracy. And in tandem with doing that to consolidate their power, they went hard and destroyed the Communist Party. McCarthyism in the 50s was absolute disgusting. I have people that that trained me, whose family members were interrogated, were ripped out of their houses, were imprisoned, people who lost their jobs. The Communist Party, basically had to go underground. And then when it reemerged in the 60s, 70s, and then 80s, it really became, a reformist party attached to the Democratic Party. So let's talk about that now. So would it have been possible in the conditions of the height of the labor aristocracy to have a socialist revolution in the United States? No. But I think the good thing to keep doing, which a lot of people did, was maintain those sleeper cells. The people that taught me, who went through, who braved through the period of the labor aristocracy, who preserved the living understanding of Marxism, Leninism that went on to me, and they maintained and grew the unions. They maintained and grew civil rights organizations, which in themselves are not revolutionary, but they are workers' power. And they are, things to be utilized to maintain conditions, act in defense, as well as train. Now that we're seeing this destruction of the labor aristocracy, and we're seeing worse conditions happening, now the people that, who kept this message alive were able to spread it to a lot more masses. We're able to go deeper and lower in the proletariat. We need to get this into plain working class language, get it as many people as possible. And I really loved how Comrade Fox brought up Center for Political Innovation, CPI. I encourage everyone to go to cpiusa.org. At least folks in the U.S. and people internationally, look up the 4 demands. These 4 demands are today's peace, land, and bread. And they are an economic bill of rights. They are nationalization of the banks, nationalizations of oil and national resources. These are demands that the imperialist system cannot give us, but we can mobilize through, mutual aid networks. We can mobilize through the union fight, civil rights fight, local democracy struggles, and we can, in those, reach the broader masses, use those as training guards for the revolution. It's an exciting time to be around that now. Now, are they going to, once we get mobilized, right now we're in a period of, social revolution before further and building infrastructure necessary for when the collapse that is coming, slowly or fast, we don't know. But are they, once we do mobilize power, are they going to be able to give us concessions this time? And I believe the answer is no. With the decline and the destruction of Western imperialism, imperialism led by U.S. imperialism, with the rise of the socialist, anti-imperialist bloc, China, Russia, etc., they do not have the reserves of people to exploit to maintain their hegemony. And that is why things are falling to pieces here. Because more people are doing business with China. Because more people are doing business with China, that means less money every time a country stands up, throws off the shackles of the imperialist system, does business with the anti-imperialist bloc. That's money coming directly out of the hands of the enemy here, which means they're not going to be able to give those concessions. There is no going back. There is no Trump make America great again. There is no return to the labor aristocracy. Socialism, pushing forward, uniting the working class, building power, building socialism, and uniting with the anti-imperialists is our only way forward. They will not be able to do these concessions again. And we have to seriously look towards socialism as the future.
And like for us here in Australia, exactly, Australia is losing its world markets everywhere. Hence why there's all this reaction that's happening here, and we're now such a import-dependent nation. We're on all the rest of the world, and that's why, hence why all this reaction is coming out. The ruling classes here are divided. What the side of basically which side of the fence their bread's buttered on. So I mean, it certainly is where a very interesting epoch in our times as well for us in Australia. I actually too like to remind once again when we've read through this all strategy and tactics. Remember, we're not, our material conditions are certainly different from what they were in Russia in 1917, and that. I'm just going to post this to the chat. That a reminder that A does not equal A. All right, and times you're going to have to find sometimes to do things a bit differently from others. And I think it's vitally important to keep that in mind. Because people say, well, they did that over here, that particular time. Why can't it work here now? Well, one, that was a particular historic conditions that determined that as well. So, yeah, that's why they did that at that time. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. But I think we came up with some good stuff today. Actually, I just want to mention about union leadership. And Dust said this before. I mean, people got to understand it's not you be the force of the change, right? Union leaderships, most of them will go, or have to go, no choice but to go along with it, or be swept aside. As simple as that. And you also taken again, just because someone's a union leader doesn't mean they're any good. You've got some good ones. I mentioned Jimmy Reed before from the Upper Clyde shipyards, and that you also got some really good. We've got historically a lot of great union leaders as well, and communists. They certainly led the charge. They built things. They built the union movement the whole lot. In Australia, we've got a rich history of that as well, in contrast to some of them today, and that as well. But that what happens? The pressure's got to be put on from the masses and the force on the ground them to do things at times. And look, get those of you who are working and not in union, I would suggest strongly advise join one and help get unionised in that, because one thing also too is just basic capital. This is just for the basic capitalists, they're scared of organised labour as well. That's why Amazon's spending millions to keep their organisations non-union. There's a simple reason why. They're scared of organised labour. They know full well, and that's a great way of building confidence among workers to advance further and fight further. Instead of being divided and scared, they are now united and from confidence in themselves that they can win. They know how to do it. They've got a way forward to do it. So it's one aspect. Unions are very good. Said unions should be schools of communism, schools of socialism, schools of class struggle. And that's what for those of us who are involved in unions are trying to do, and give those workers the confidence to advance further, not just by win certain wages, conditions, and other concessions out of the capitalist class, but get into their mind it's the system itself, and it gives them the ability to move into a socialist consciousness.
Very powerful. I want to go over this comment from the socialist carpenter. Very glad to have fellow working class folks with us. We are city builders, is the name of the CPI educational manual. And I want to take apart this comment here. Jimmy Dore is not going to lead the revolution. I'm thinking the empire will implode before we get the chance to overthrow it. I got to stop you right there, brother, comrade. I got to look at you straight in the eye and said, revolutionary optimism is the duty of every revolutionary. People, great leaders like William Z. Foster, the people in the McCarthy period whose party became outlawed, who were tortured, who lost their careers, who were forced to go underground. They would have killed to have the conditions we do now. We have more material basis for solidarity and for building and spreading of the message of socialism than any time before. There is no other path but optimism. And
That's right.
The bourgeois wants you to think you are an individual. The bourgeois ideology, the nihilism pushed in the media, the pessimism pushed in the media, this so-called, this holly crap, don't look up bullshit that's trying to teach you there is no solution. There is a solution, and you are the solution, and you can do something about it. Now let's talk about Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore takes on the correct position of being against the imperialist sheepdogs. It's straight out and plain. Jimmy Dore was a liberal. Jimmy Dore was not, a few years ago, was praising Obama. But him, just like thousands and millions of other people, are becoming disillusioned with the society. And Jimmy Dore was an example of a public figure that we got to see become disillusioned. And when he was backing forces that were safe for the imperialist system, when he had AOC on his show, they left him alone. They were happy for him to grow. He was just part of the bread tube. But then when he crossed the line and he said, the imperialist sheepdogs do not care about the people. They are only getting the people into the Democratic Party. When he completely rejected the Democratic Party and he put out Force the Vote, and he exposed the imperialist sheepdogs, AOC and the Squad and Sanders and the like of them, for not giving the people universal health care, why hundreds of thousands of people are dying in a pandemic, was when he became on the right side of that issue. And we need to be on the right side of the issue, and we need to find people like that that can push more people towards that position. We need to completely reject. We need to mobilize and engage in ways that make the people who aren't disillusioned with the system, we need to have them become disillusioned with the system. And we cannot get lost in the tactic of working with the electoral process to try to bring about change, because the conditions in the imperialist core will not be changed by the Democratic Party. We need to build independent outside power, and we need to expose the imperialist sheepdogs for who they are. And people like Jimmy Dore are great allies in that fight, in that struggle.
Very good. Very good. Very good. And look, I just on that guy saying, and I mean, look, I can understand your sentiment about that, but look, reality is, at the end of the day, if you're going to wait for something to implode, you could be waiting for years and years and years. But it's not going to just happen overnight. It's going to happen quickly. Canberra can rebound it in a magnificent fashion as well, if you want to put it that way. I just look. There are some basic things you can do, and I will look. Highly recommend get in touch. I'm not too sure where you live, but I mean, if you're ever been to the US, get in touch with the CPI USA, and get some interest there. I also too see where if there's some struggles happening around locally in your all around your locality and that. I'll be involved in there as well. Get to meet ordinary people and all that. But I think if we're just going to wait for something to happen, well, we're going to be waiting for a very long time. Indeed, we don't look. One thing that's lesson learned out of this, during Lenin's time and Stalin's time, they did not wait around for things to happen. They just got on with it, and this is what the reality was. This is written by people who will be heavily over their heads in practice as well, not just theory, but just in practice. They didn't wait around and do things. So look, look, I can understand a little bit of a pessimism or sentiment about that. Sure, and things going to be frustrating as anything at time you want to, hit something, but it's not going to. Look, at the end of the day, take a deep breath. Basically, okay, let's see what's achievable as well. All right, so and yeah, as I said, get in touch with CPI USA if you're in the US. If you're here in Australia, get in touch with myself and that just send us a message or something like that, and yeah, well, by YouTube or Facebook, and yeah, we'll talk further.
Hmm. I want to address a comment here. Thank you, Carla Hernandez, for being with us. Um, I'd like to read your comment here. I'm buying silver with the money I've been saving. I quit smoking cigarettes. We're $11 a pack. I commend you on your personal growth. That's absolutely beautiful. And we all got to do what we need to do to maintain financial stability amongst our individual families. I think that's important. We shouldn't lose sight of that. We shouldn't be like the ultra left out here that's like, oh, we don't need that. It's all about love or what have you. Nah, we got real material issues. But the thing is, the imperialist media, specifically the right wing media, wants to make it all about personal responsibility. They want to shift all of the blame off of the rich folks. They call the rich folks, oh, those are good business people. Trump's a businessman. When Trump got $1 million loan from his dad or whatever, we don't get that stuff. Our power isn't gonna come from our own financial responsibility. Our power isn't going to come from some superior knowledge of manipulating the crypto markets. Our power is going to come from the people. We got to get in touch with the people. They have the money, they have the guns. What we have is our labor. What we have is the masses of people that can stop the system, the masses of people that can disrupt and poke holes and expose their rigged election systems and their rigged political and media systems. And do what you got to do financially for yourself, but we got to start talking to our neighbors, building networks, make a list of contacts, engage and support the local union and civil rights struggles. That's my advice to you, sister. And thanks for joining us, Comrade Fox.
Yeah, well, look, just on a lighter note, I know we want to finish up certainly, but it cost a packet of cigarettes here now are up over $50 a packet here in Australian dollars, and that's a lot of it's government excise. I mean, yes, they've reduced the population of smoking, but certainly a very expensive addiction and habit. So yeah, it's I gave it up many years ago, and I haven't looked back. Put it that way. I'm glad I put them away. But look, I think it's been a great show tonight. Look, thanks to everyone commenting. Helen, you're quite right. Barbarism or socialism. I think it's the ultimate choice we've got, and I think I think that's what really pretty much lays bare. Well, that is pretty much what we've got. The choice is ours, and I think, well, look, no, I don't want to live through barbarism. I want socialism, and and certainly myself and many other comrades, that's what we want to object. That is our objective, and yeah. But it was a great study tonight, and look, thank you.
Right on, brother. Right on. So I'll just, I think we're coming up on our time. We're a little bit over an hour and a half. If I could sum it up right quickly. Given the current conditions, we need to go lower and deeper into the proletariat. We need to make Marxism working class again. I want you to start a YouTube show. I want you to start writing articles. I want you to form a study group of the Center for Political Study Guide Manual. We are city builders. Thank you so much. As always, raise your fist, brother. Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All power to the people.
All power to the people. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you.